Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker and I'm joined by Stephen Methven. How are you doing, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm all right, Michael. How's it going with you?
Yeah, fine. Good. I was really not looking forward to a day speaking about Rachel Reeves, but I'm actually, after having read about it all afternoon, I think there are some interesting things to say. We will be discussing that. I'll be speaking to Matt Lawrence, Director of Commonwealth, very interesting guy. Also on the show, the Israeli government has been secretly arming criminal gangs in Gaza, and Elon Musk is being sued by French Tesla customers. Also, we'll give you an update on the riots in Ballymena, which have entered a second night. That's in Northern Ireland, of course. Stay tuned for all of that. Before we start the show tonight, though, if you tuned in last night, you'll have seen Stephen share the fantastic news that we've now reached over 700 new regular supporters since launching our call for 1,000 of you to join us a week ago. Now, brilliant result. Thank you so much. We keep saying this, though. The next few years are critical, and it's our supporter-funded model that is going to make us able to grow into an organisation capable of taking on billionaire interests. So across Novara Media, whether it's here on Novara Live or in our articles, video and audio teams, we all have huge journalistic ambitions and we want our output to be bigger, go deeper and reach wider than ever. Now, all of that is impossible without your support. You are the guys who make this possible. And we're so close to hitting our target of 1,000 new supporters. So can you please help us get there? To do so, go to novaramedia.com/support to help us build a new media for a different politics. Thank you so much again. The British public do not like Rachel Reeves. Asked at the end of last month whether the Chancellor was doing a good job, 51% said no. And in case you think, oh, that's neck and neck, 51% saying no is not bad. Only 16% said yes. So, after U-turning on the winter fuel payments cut at the start of this week, today's spending review is being seen as Reeves's last chance to turn her career around. So how did she do? Well, the first news that was briefed last night seemed positive. The Guardian reported that Rachel Reeves was to unveil a £39 billion spending pledge to build social and affordable housing over the next 10 years. That's double the current budget. And that formed part of Rachel Reeves' argument that this Labour government was not overseeing a return to austerity.
In this spending review, total departmental budgets will grow by 2.3% a year in real terms. Compare that to the Conservative choice of austerity. In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society. And it was a destructive choice for our economy too.
This is part of a spending review, which is a key moment for any Chancellor. So it's when the Treasury set out the various multi-year budgets for all of the departments in government. So that means it's potentially more important than any budget in any single year. So they happen every year and they get updated in 12 months' time. This spending review will last for at least 3 years. So who were the winners and losers? Well, this chart shows how the day-to-day budgets of each department will change over the next 3 years. Science, innovation and technology is the big winner with a 7.4% increase. That's from a relatively small base, though. It's health and social care where the real money is going. That has an average annual increase of 2.8%. The losers in terms of day-to-day spending are the Foreign Office, mainly because of that aid cut. Also transport and the Home Office and the Culture Department. Remember, this is day-to-day spending because when it comes to capital spending, so that's investment, the picture is somewhat different. So here defence is the big winner, though transport, energy and education all do quite well. So where's the money going? Well, on transport, £15.6 billion has been allocated between 2027 and 2031, so over the next 5 years or so, for transport projects in English city regions outside of London. On energy, an additional £11.5 billion has been committed towards the cost of building the Sizewell C nuclear power plant in Suffolk. This is presumably how Rachel Reeves hopes she can bring about some growth, which they've been desperate for. Big economic events, like a spending review, though, are also about political positioning. And Reeves, in the speech, spent a long time contrasting Labour's record on investment with Tory austerity. It's clearly, though, Reform who are now the real threat to the government in the polls. And Reeves took a number of opportunities to attack Nigel Farage.
The member for Clacton may be playing the friend of the workers now, but some of us are old enough to remember when he described the disastrous Liz Truss budget as, and I quote, the best Conservative budget since the 1980s. Mr. Speaker, after the damage he's done, he still nods along. They have learnt nothing. And his party have been in Parliament for less than a year, and yet they have already racked up £80 billion of unfunded commitments. They are simply not serious.
I don't know if it's going to, allow Labour to leapfrog Reform in the polls, but I suppose holding him to account on what he said about that mini budget doesn't seem like a bad political strategy. And well, to discuss the economics of this, I suppose the politics as well, and what's in the spending review, I'm joined now by Matt Lawrence, Director of the Commonwealth think tank. Welcome to the show, Matt. Great to have you back. I suppose to begin, Rachel Reeves has insisted that this Labour government is not returning us to austerity. I know at least on social media today, I can tell that not everyone is convinced. Is she right?
So austerity in a way is in the eye of the beholder. And as your charts kind of demonstrated, you can kind of cut it a number of ways. So it's clearly true that there has been, relative to the baseline inherited from the Conservative plans prior to the election, a significant uptick in capital investment concentrated in a number of sectors and departments. So defence, energy, to an extent housing, as you mentioned. And that is, broadly welcome, particularly in energy and housing, though we can sort of get into the details. And then on day-to-day spending, which frankly is where most people experience public spending, public services, I think it's a more mixed picture. So clearly the NHS, as the kind of great gravitational force of public services, sucks in the biggest, largest uptick, roughly around 30 billion increase. And that is significant, and that will that is welcome against nonetheless significant pressures. But that does mean outside of a couple of these core protected departments, day-to-day spending for many people will really not feel like that much of a change. There will still continue to be real squeeze given sort of demands on public services. And so while it's welcome, this isn't, rolling back austerity. It's not like we're going back to kind of pre-2010 era. We're still like from a lower baseline. And while there have been significant gains that should be welcomed, this really isn't enough to transform the everyday experience of people, but also, not enough to transform the sort of productive capacity of the economy and get the economy growing, as Rachel Reeves stresses is her number one mission.
So let's stick on current spending. We'll park investment for a moment. So would your argument be that she should have increased sort of departmental spending across the board, potentially to a larger degree, and that should have been paid for by taxing? Because I suppose she can sort of say, I'm spending this on capital because I'm allowed to borrow for investment. She's not allowed to borrow for current spending. So would your critique be she should be more generous when it comes to current spending and increase taxes, potentially just on the wealthy or potentially across the board?
Yeah, I think broadly that's right. I think in a way, often their economic strategy is approached from the wrong end of the telescope. So it's approached from a great height of what are the big infrastructure projects we need to deliver? And that informs clearly their capital investment strategy, which again, there's much to that. There are two prongs here, and that is a welcome sort of movement forwards, albeit arguably not enough. But on the other end of it, really what drives the economy is when households are secure, when they feel like they have economic security, when they feel they can go out and spend, they feel they can go out and take risks, they can start businesses, they can sort of take a chance on sort of changing job. And what we know at the moment, modeling from the anti-poverty campaign and research group JRF shows that on current trends, this is going to be the first parliament where after housing costs, living standards are set to fall. And this spending review isn't doing enough to reverse that. So again, there's welcome increases in sort of in-kind benefits through public service spending, so the increase in the NHS, for example. But local government, for example, where many people sort of intersect with services, social care, other sort of areas, and just the state of where they live, what does their high street look like? How does it feel? There just hasn't been enough. And so, yes, absolutely, we'd say what Britain really needs is this reset to get out permanently from this kind of almost like halfway house where we're neither kind of spending enough to make a big difference, but we're sort of still taxing at a higher rate. And to say, actually, like, we need to restore day-to-day budget for local government, for further education colleges, a whole range of sectors, and then above all, tackling sort of, a social security system, which is not only sort of hard and unfair in how you navigate it, but just doesn't put enough money in people's pockets. And really, that is in a way the way to get the economy going. It is to put money in people's pockets, to drive infrastructure investment, and to kind of coordinate that in a plan. And in a way, what we've seen today is kind of one foot on the accelerator. There are some welcome things there. And I think thinking through their strategy, which is like, let's reform the fiscal rules, that will enable us to increase public investment. That is the accelerator. But one foot on the brake in that day-to-day spending outside of the NHS and protected departments won't really feel like much for change. And so for ordinary people, there won't be that sense of like a page is turning. And so I think that's both an economic risk, but clearly a political risk.
So you said it's sort of after housing costs that people's living standards are expected to fall across this parliament. Now, obviously, I suppose the Labour would argue that, well, if they can lower housing costs with this investment in affordable housing, then that would do something to, I suppose, militate against that. I suppose I have a problem on these announcement days where I hear £39 billion on affordable housing and I think, oh, that sounds good. But at the same time, I don't really know what 39 billion spends. I wondered would you be able to sort of put that into context? Is 39 billion pounds a lot of houses? Is that sort of something which we should expect has a significant effect on the housing stock and housing affordability?
So there's a number of things to unpack here. First of all, it is welcome, as you say, it's almost a doubling of what they inherited in terms of the Affordable Homes Programme. That is a grant that can go to either housing association, council housing, or private developers delivering affordable housing, which is kind of 80% or below of market rate. And I think it's maybe worth digging into that in a moment, because what exactly that is going into, I think, will fundamentally shape questions of affordability and whether it can genuinely make a dent in the housing crisis. That type of scale, again, it's hard to estimate right now. And this is, as you say, part of the problem of these type of days. Big numbers, big trajectories, but it depends on what baseline you're talking from, what sort of, trajectory you're looking at. I think that would be looking at around 100,000, homes potentially with that. But potentially more, potentially less, depends where it's being built, depends on how planning reform sort of lowers the cost of development. But sort of, I think to put that in context, 3.9 billion, definitely an improvement. Nonetheless, organizations like the New Economics Foundation estimate that to build enough social housing to really meet needs just in England, we need around 11.8 billion pounds of investment. So yes, a step forwards, but against a backdrop of both decades of underinvestment and unmet needs that really materially shape people's lives. This is one step forwards, but one step forwards on a very significant journey. And I think the politics of housing is clearly going to define this parliament's politics. And so, again, one step forwards, but for a Labour government, for the politics of this, significant risks still.
So just to clarify, so the New Economics Foundation, they think we need to spend 11.8 billion every year. So obviously 11.8 billion is smaller than 39. Yeah, so 39 billion.
Housing. So yeah,
39 billion is across
shortfall.
Yeah. 39 billion is across 10 years, so 3.9 billion a year, and not all in social housing, also affordable. They're saying 12 billion just on social housing every year.
But in a way, it sums up the kind of, the politics and the political economy of this government. So it is roughly reversing the cuts introduced by the sort of both the coalition and the sort of what they inherited from the Conservative government. But it's a sort of a fraction of what a lot of the social housing and kind of affordable housing sector were calling for. And it remains significantly below the kind of post-war highs of investment as a share of GDP. And then I think more interestingly, this question of like who's delivering it. So not just like how much, but who. Will this be mainly for private developers to deliver affordable housing, which is affordable in a quote unquote for many people, still often far out of reach? Or will this help unlock a large-scale sort of council house developing program, which is really what this country needs? And so I think it really sort of speaks to some of the sort of contradictions, the tensions within this Labour government. Its possibilities relative to the baseline it inherited, but it's sort of very substantial limits absent a further change in direction.
Some of the other investments, is there anything in this that sort of you think is exciting? Investment in nuclear power, investment in transport outside of London. She's hoping this is going to bring about growth. Is it a bit of a damp squib?
So I think, for example, DESNZ, the department that Ed Miliband runs, that sort of controls energy and net zero policy, I think they are one of the big winners in terms of capital investment. So from a lower base, but one of the big significant winners. And so one of the programs that will help sort of stand up is the Warm Homes program, around £14 billion of investment. And that I think will make a really big difference in the fact that Britain has some of the draftiest, worst insulated homes in the in Europe. And that is both just like a miserable experience for people exposed to the insecurity of cold and damp, but it also means we've got some of the highest energy bills in Europe. So that's a really sort of good intervention that is to be welcomed. On nuclear, obviously there's lots of debate around that, but certainly I guess they would like to sort of sell this image of like unlocking the Promethean power of the atom and sort of energy abundance. And I think it's certainly true that nuclear as part of this kind of energy security and supply mix is certainly what I'd imagine they'd be thinking. So again, I think they'd see that as a significant win. Whether that alone is enough to generate growth, I'd go back to that point of like what really drives growth is economic security at the household level, which then has a sort of spillover effect into communities. Communities then aggregate up to regions, into the nation. And so I think until people feel economically secure, and there wasn't enough today to do that, we're still going to be building the economy on fairly fragile foundations. That said, look, large-scale investment in transport, £500 million for railways in Wales, for example, that will make material difference, both in terms of improving lives and improving sort of the potential of the economy, and those things are obviously intimately interlinked. So, of course, there are sort of things you can point to. Whether it's a cohesive enough story that is both about capital investment at scale, but also fixing everyday life and sort of day-to-day spending, I think that is less clear. And I think clearly, like as it is unpacked over the days ahead, I'm sure there will be sort of deepening questions of like, is this doing enough to address the fundamental question Labour have to answer this Parliament, which is improve living standards? And if not, there will be a political penalty they will face.
And the Tory attack line today has been that this means that Labour are going to have to raise taxes in their budget in the autumn. Labour are saying, no, it doesn't. We've funded all of this, yada, yada, yada. Slightly boring debate in a way. But it seems to me that at some point, Labour might have to raise some money. I'm in favour of raising taxes in general. I suppose I want your position on what taxes they should raise, because it does seem like the last set of taxes she raised on employers' national insurance, there is a reasonably strong argument that that's not a great tax to raise in the sense that it dramatically sort of increases the cost of employing people. So if they are to say, we are going to have a tax raising budget in autumn and just politically hope for the best, what should they do?
So I think part of their conundrum is the sort of pledge to not increase sort of income tax or VAT or corporation tax, kind of some of the big levers of tax, which then drove them towards the employer NICs, which has sort of some of these downstream effects on employment, as you mentioned. If they stick to that, I think politically that is something that I think they are kind of, don't think Reeves can row back on that without a big political penalty. There are still other options, taxing wealth. I think there's a reality of like, taxing wealth, not work, is a great slogan. I think we should tax wealth more than work, but work and income from labour still have to be a big contributor there. But you could do things around sort of CGT and sort of capital gains tax. You could do things around wealth tax. Gordon Brown was talking about a tax on sort of gambling companies. Angela Rayner had a leaked note which suggested around £4 to £5 billion worth of sort of micro measures in a way that add up. But again, if we're sort of serious about really a redistributive agenda that puts monies in people's pockets, that ends poverty, that sort of recognises we're both a wealthy country, but that wealth is sort of sucked up to the top and not fairly distributed, we're going to have to go much further than that. And that will require both sort of higher taxes on the top, but also, again, politics that is able to force open that question of income tax, VAT, corporation tax, some of these things, which are politically difficult, but necessary if we're going to be able to fund the type of, humane, dignified and decent society that requires, greater sort of social security spending and other measures to rebuild, communities that have been shattered for the last 15 years.
Matt Lawrence, thank you so much for joining me. I feel like I understand the spending review much better than I did at the beginning of our conversation. I have got an update for you. We have a very exciting event coming up. So on Wednesday, the 25th of June, Novara's Aaron Bastani will be live and in conversation with French left-wing leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon for an episode of Downstream IRL. That'll be held in Earth Theatre in Hackney. Tickets are still available, but they're going fast. So follow the link in the description to get one while you can. That's going to be super interesting. That's a good get, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He's, in the running to be the next French president. All right, big deal. Europe's Bernie Sanders, I suppose. Unless we want to say that Jeremy Corbyn still has that mantle. I think Jean-Luc Mélenchon is probably closer to power at this point in time than Corbyn is, even if Corbyn was closer a little while ago. An Israel-backed criminal group in Gaza has reported that Hamas has killed 50 of its members in recent months. So the group, led by drug trafficker Yasser Abu Shabab, calls itself both the Anti-Terror Service and the Popular Forces. It's been a growing force in Rafah, where its members are accused of robbing aid trucks with the protection of the Israeli military. Reports of the Israeli military being complicit in gang-related aid raids are nothing new in Gaza. In November last year, Haaretz reported that the Israeli army was allowing gangs in Gaza to loot aid trucks and extort protection fees from their drivers. Then in December last year, Reuters reported that looting by gangs was crippling the food supply in Gaza, with Israel standing by and allowing it to continue. And just last month, the newspaper reported how Palestinians in Gaza were accusing Israel of enabling armed gangs to operate freely as part of Netanyahu's forced displacement plan. Last week, though, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was forced to come clean about just how far the country was going to support the gang. Pressed by opposition politicians in the Knesset, Netanyahu disclosed that the Israeli government had been secretly arming the criminals, and in a public relations scramble afterwards, Netanyahu released this video.
On the advice of security officials, we activated clans in Gaza that oppose Hamas. What's wrong with this? This is only good and saves the lives of IDF soldiers. The publication of this only benefits Hamas, but opposition leader Lieberman doesn't care.
What's wrong with this? Of course, there is a very long history of Israel arming militant groups, or I suppose tacitly supporting one way or another, because they think that it will weaken their real enemy. So the origins of Hamas are in large part because Israel really wanted an Islamist force that could undermine and divide the PLO. They got what they wanted, I suppose. What more do we know about this gang and its relationship with Israel? Well, they say they're helping Gaza's civilians. And earlier this week, Abu Shabab told The Guardian this: "My activities are humanitarian and it's for my people only. We are providing security in areas controlled by our national forces and providing support to hundreds of families, with hundreds of people flocking to our areas every day." But the group's activities cast doubt on that claim. So Yasser Abu Shabab and up to 300 of his men are openly involved in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Now, that's the shady US and Israel-backed group employing CIA-linked mercenaries to distribute aid in Gaza. It's an operation that's been condemned by just about every relief agency on the planet. Now, according to Abu Shabab, the men are working with GHF to pack supplies and secure their entry into Gaza. But video posted on social media suggests otherwise. Eyewitnesses described Abu Shabab's armed men lining up Palestinians waiting for aid at a GHF distribution point while guarding the site. But later, after several Palestinians were shot and killed while waiting to get that aid, the group issued a statement denying that they'd been in the area. Sam Rose, director of UNRWA in Gaza, told Channel 4 what he thought of the presence of Abu Shabab's men at the GHF sites.
Oh, there's a total irony that the one entity that we know and is on the record for having been involved in looting is now the entity that's been put in charge of managing the security around the looting. But look, this is part of a much bigger irony in that the entity, in this case the government of Israel, that's been responsible for blocking the supplies of aid coming into Gaza is now the entity that is supposed to be the one to guarantee that supply.
Abu Shabab's men also seem to have free reign in Israel-controlled areas. So this video released by Hamas appears to show gang members moving around Rafah in front of Israeli troops while carrying heavy weaponry. Also identified in the video is Abu Shabab's second-in-command, a mercenary named Ghassan al-Dani. It's reported that al-Dahini was previously a member of another group, the ISIS-linked Jaish al-Islam. And he isn't shy about asserting his authority in Rafah. Here he fires what appears to be a Kalashnikov rifle in Gaza in front of a car bearing United Arab Emirates plates. That led to some speculation that the group may have some wealthy backers in the Gulf. Now, since as early as November last year, Hamas has been fighting the rise of this Israel-backed gang in Rafah. Hamas say they formed a special team, the Arrow Unit, to stop Abu Shabab's men from looting and aiding the displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. The Hamas video, and part of which we showed you earlier, was a prelude to an ambush by the Arrow Unit on some Abu Shabab gang members. But earlier this month, Abu Shabab's crew were protected from a second Hamas attack. So according to Israel's I-24 News, the Israeli military intervened to protect the gang from Hamas fighters, deploying a drone strike to help Abu Shabab. And 4 Hamas fighters were killed in that strike. And after Israel's military intervention, today's announcement from Abu Shabab's group seems aimed at distancing the group from the IDF. So in a statement, the gang says this: Hamas has killed over 50 of our volunteers, including relatives of our leader, Yasser, as we guarded aid convoys and redistributed supplies that were otherwise destined for corrupt entities linked to Hamas. We've also cleared explosive remnants from the area, losing members in the process. Hamas have released their own statement saying this: had it not been for the intervention of the Zionist Air Force to protect the traitor Yasser Abu Shabab, he would have been in the grip of the resistance today. We will pursue the traitors no matter how long it takes, and we will affirm that the occupation's protection of him will not last, and we will reach him sooner or later. Stephen, I want to bring you in on this. I mean, what that the director of UNRWA was saying on Channel 4, seemed particularly relevant, which is that Israel have taken the task of distributing aid away from all of the internationally recognized aid agencies, because this food wasn't being distributed by Hamas, it's being distributed by UNRWA and the World Food Programme and the like, and they have given it instead to this gang who are, as that gentleman from UNRWA said, the only group on record having been proven to have sort of stolen a bunch of aid, and now they're in charge of distributing it.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? One of the things that I found sort of strangest about the statement from Abu Shabab was the idea that he was doing humanitarian work in Gaza. I mean, you can't be armed by Israel and be doing humanitarian work in Gaza. If you're armed by Israel, you're working for Israel, whether you think you are or not. Handing any responsibility for aid over to this group, who are known, as you say, on record, having looted trucks moving over the border, having demanded money off of humanitarian drivers, it's kind of just a sort of Netanyahu kind of classic play, really, because. There's one thing, as you said in the piece, really, there's one thing that we know about Benjamin Netanyahu is that he is the world's greatest Hamas supporter. As you said, he's well known for having supported the founding of the group in 2019 in a Likud conference. He sort of said, if you want to avoid the construction of a Palestinian state, you have to give money to Hamas. You have to bolster it because then it separates the Palestinians in the West Bank from the Palestinians in Gaza. So supporting this group, as well as handing over responsibilities to during aid, means that you actually put them into contact with Palestinian civilians all the time. So if what you're trying to do, which is probably what Israel is trying to do, which is create a kind of new militant group in Gaza, which can take the place of Hamas, and people like Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, have been very clear in some of their statements that the Israeli military is actually trying to wipe out all of Hamas's infrastructure in the Strip. So not just military infrastructure, but civilian infrastructure, civilian leaders. So if you've got another militant group that you're supporting and putting in contact with Palestinians who are exhausted, starving, and so on and so forth, it's a pretty easy way to build support for them. And then you've created this vacuum where there are no more leadership positions in the civilian force, and you have a group that's ready to fill them. And it would have been, not a good plan, but a strategic plan from Israel's point of view, if it hadn't been for the case that Netanyahu completely dobbed this group in the Knesset. Just signed a death warrant for all of the members of Abu Shabab's group by exposing the fact that they are not humanitarian workers, that they're not a potential resistance group against Hamas within Gaza, but rather that they're Israeli in Israel's pocket and being armed by Israel, and therefore, as every single Palestinian in Gaza will understand, working for Israel. So I suspect that that was the Israeli plan. And it was interesting that the person who managed to get Netanyahu to admit it in the Knesset wasn't some left-wing member of parliament or one of the Arab members of the Knesset, but rather another right-wing politician. And his statement afterwards was that, it's a security issue for Israel to be arming groups within Gaza. It's a security issue that Israel discovered for itself on October the 7th. To be arming groups in Gaza, because he said that eventually those weapons will be pointed back at Israel. So that seems like an interesting schism in Israel's right-wing political class. On the one hand, you've got Netanyahu, who is prepared to take not only huge risks with the lives of Palestinians in Gaza in order to prevent the construction of a Palestinian state, but also to take huge risks with the lives of Israelis in order to prevent the construction of a Palestinian state. And it seems to me from the statement of Lieberman that part of the Israeli right has realized that it is an existential problem for them if they continue to support groups like Hamas or like Abu Shabab in Gaza. I mean, I don't know what their alternative plans are, presumably not to support the construction of a Palestinian state, but it does look like an undermining of this kind of deeply destructive, homicidal tendency in Netanyahu, personally, to continue to sow as much chaos in Gaza in order to prevent the establishment of a state, no matter what the costs are for Israel of that chaos.
Yeah, I've been seeing on sort of Twitter over the past week, sort of journalists who'd been sort of, I think, accusing Owen of anti-Semitism for having sort of linked an ISIS-backed group with Netanyahu. And then Owen sort of saying, well, Netanyahu's just admitted it now. I suppose it is. Gaslighting is sort of is to underplay it, isn't there? But there's something that Israel does, which is to say, we couldn't possibly give them power because they're too disorganized, they're too radical, they're fighting each other, and then they do everything in their power to make sure that the radicals win and that they're constantly at war, right? So I think Israel probably they wouldn't mind if a civil war were to break out now among the ruins of Gaza, because that would just be another excuse to say, this is why these people can never have power.
Strategy. It was used by the apartheid government in South Africa as well. Very, very, a government which is comparable in many ways to the government of Israel, to separate tribal groups in South Africa, to constantly support different kinds of political factions, leadership factions amongst the groups in the homelands of South Africa, in the hope of keeping people permanently divided and permanently occupied, battling each other for scraps of political power in those homelands, rather than uniting and taking on the real enemy, which was the apartheid government.
Elon Musk's far-right antics have already sunk sales of Teslas in Europe, and by a massive 67%. That's by 2/3. That's huge. The world's richest man's woes, though, are only increasing on this continent of ours. And that's because existing Tesla customers are now suing the company. They're upset that their cars have become extreme right symbols. So the 10 customers suing the company are all stuck in contracts leasing their cars from Tesla. So you sort of lease the car for 4 years, then you can buy it afterwards. They say that Trump's actions since they acquired their cars have depreciated their ability to enjoy driving their cars in peace. The case cites incidents such as Musk doing what looked very much like a Nazi salute, as well as endorsing the German AfD party. And a lawyer for the drivers has said this. Because of Elon Musk's actions, Tesla-branded vehicles have become strong political symbols and now appear to be veritable extreme right totems, to the dismay of those who acquired them with the sole aim of possessing an innovative and ecological vehicle. Obviously, the coding of a Tesla is probably the product that has had the most dramatic turnaround, because electric cars used to be sort of associated with the liberal left, and now the leading electric car company is run by a right-wing nut job. The suit alleges that customers face a higher risk of vandalism against their cars, higher insurance costs, and a depreciation in the value of the cars. Again, all because of Musk's antics in recent months. And the lawyers at least claim to have some persuasive evidence. So they've said that vandals had engraved one client's Tesla with a swastika, while others had defecated on a client's car. And for his part, Elon Musk is yet to show any remorse for getting people's cars smeared in shit. But he has this week expressed remorse for something else. So he says, I regret my posts about President Donald Trump last week. They went too far. Apparently, he has deleted the various tweets accusing Donald Trump of being in the Epstein files. Stephen, do you think these Tesla owners have a case? I mean, they're only trying to get out of their... I don't think they're even like asking for loads of money in return. They're trying to get out of their contract. So they're in a 4-year contract. Like, you might have a 1-year contract with a phone. I mean, maybe some of our viewers have rented cars, so they don't need me to sort of break this down in a language that I understand. But apparently, I can't drive. You lease a car for 4 years, you get it new, and then once you're released from that contract, you can buy it at a reduced price. These people, they're maybe a year or two into their lease, and they're saying, this isn't the car we thought we were leasing because now everyone thinks we're Nazis and tries to shit on our cars. How do you see this going?
I mean, I don't know. I don't understand French law. I have no idea what rights people have to get out of contracts in France. I mean, I think it does show you, though, how quickly status can vanish. I mean, it's very hard to get it, very quick to lose it, as these bougie French people are finding out now that their Teslas aren't the kind of green fancy status symbols that they were before. But I mean, whether they get out of it or not, I mean, it's hard to imagine that Elon Musk is really going to care, given that, just last week he called the president of the United States a pedophile in front of millions of people. I mean, didn't literally use those words, but the implication was clear enough. So I feel like, given the losses that he's made, which I'm not very good at numbers, so I've written them down here, which is a 14.2% drop in Tesla's share price, wiping off $152 billion from its capital, Musk's own fortune dropping by $9 billion in the wake of that row. It doesn't feel like, a bunch of French drivers on a contract are going to upset him. I mean, as you said as well, also, that stock is slowly climbing now that he's climbed down from some of those statements. But it's interesting to think. I see that, like, Musk has to climb down and has to apologize because it's a pretty hard lesson to learn that even though you may be one of the world's richest men, you're not nearly as powerful as the president of the world's richest country, who has, the entire US government basically to deploy against Musk if he wanted to, removing contracts for SpaceX and so forth. So a pretty bitter lesson for Musk to learn. But I guess the thing he probably wants to do quite carefully is not get too close to Trump again. I mean, if he's thinking about like Tesla share, Tesla value, kind of, make the apology so he doesn't lose his SpaceX contracts or doesn't, there's no further rupture, but not get too close so that he doesn't scare off people like these French drivers who are trying to get out of the contract, other potential Tesla customers. Although, to be honest, the brand is never going to be the same, or it's going to take a very long time to regain the status that it once had. I mean, you can't just go around throwing Sig Heils and expect your brand not to be tarnished. But interesting to see what he does and how close he tries to get himself to Trump again. Whether Trump will want him close, I guess, is another question.
Yeah, it is interesting because in that standoff, it clearly did escalate when Trump said we'll cancel SpaceX's contracts, and that would really financially harm Elon Musk. But at the same time, Elon Musk does have an enormous amount of leverage because, yes, he's probably not quite as powerful as the president of the world's most powerful country, but he does own 2/3 of the satellites in the sky. And he owns sort of the only space fleet that can reliably take American astronauts to the International Space Station. So it's not obvious who has more power, him or Donald Trump, although the fact that now he is grovelling back to the president suggests that probably you are right there, Stephen. A couple of comments. PP Poo Poo, one of my favourite commenters on here. Can't they find a National Front supporter to sell the cars to? I suppose the issue here is why sort of Teslas are in a bit of a bind, because they are a product that, you know, traditionally appeals to liberals. I don't think National Front voters tend to buy electric cars. So until you have sort of completely switched how sort of people, the types of people that want electric cars, you're in a really difficult situation if you've created an electric car for right-wingers, right? That's a difficult thing to sell. Someone's also said, however much you dislike someone, don't shit on their car, which I think is probably true. I agree with those values expressed there. Northern Ireland has been rocked by a second night of rioting in the town of Ballymena. Hundreds of rioters descended on the homes of immigrants in the county Antrim town, smashing windows and breaking down doors, leaving families cowering inside. Businesses were also attacked and cars were set on fire. Riot police tried to control the crowds, but were greeted with thrown bricks, fireworks, and even petrol bombs, injuring 17 officers. Now, that brings the number of police injured to 32 since the violence erupted on Monday night. Some rioters even filmed themselves breaking into houses and setting them alight.
Yo, fuck that foreigners! The kettle! Yes! Yeah, fucking cowboys, yes!
Gosh, it's really like people's houses being set on fire. I mean, it was the image of the riots in England, and they were in Northern Ireland as well, actually, that I think has most stuck with everyone, was when they tried to set on fire that hotel housing asylum seekers. And now to have people from ethnic minorities, their houses burnt down, it's just, I mean, because it's so dangerous for a start. The violence erupted on Monday following a peaceful protest over two 14-year-old boys alleged to have sexually assaulted a teenage girl. The boys had appeared in court earlier that day, charged with attempted rape. A Romanian interpreter had read them the charges. Now, according to police, rioters began to carry out racially motivated attacks on unrelated immigrant households in the area. One of those targeted was Philip Roos, a worker from the Philippines employed at a Ballymena site building electric buses. He told the Irish News that his house was attacked while his wife and two small children were sleeping, saying this.
I received a call last night at exactly 12 midnight. My wife rang me a call and she said that there's a sudden explosion and eventually she see smoke and fire. Then I rashly drove home from work. Then I see many police car, many policemen here, and two fire truck, and I cannot enter my home and my premises. And I am thinking about this car at my back. I'm fixing this car. This is owned by my friend. I just finished fixing this car, and I don't know why that there is will be extremists or activists. I don't know why. I have no enemy. All my neighbors here are my friends.
The Belfast Telegraph's night editor gave LBC these details.
This is purely racism. It's unusual for Northern Ireland to have racist riots. Normally we're fighting each other, but in this case, it's involved with racist attacks on the Romanian community in Ballymena, which I've never seen anything like it before. And with Filipino people putting big signs on their doors saying, "I'm Filipino," because obviously they don't want to be drawn into this whole racist violence of cars being burned and, of course, the police being attacked.
Mika Kolev, a Bulgarian mother of two, was also caught up in the violence after rioters broke into her house. She told BBC Northern Ireland this. "It's making me move from here to save my children, to not have any depression, any memory in the future for this. We know what's going to happen. It's not possible to wait to see what's going to happen. We never made any problems. If someone from Bulgaria or Romania makes a problem, just go to them and face the problem. Not everyone. Not everybody is a problem in this country. We have been here for 10 years and we have worked and paid rent for 10 years, gone to school normally. We never make a problem. I feel like this is my country, my city. I work, I live here. My daughter was born at this house. She is happy at school and loves music from here. She plays here, has a passport for here. She's scared. In a joint statement, ministers from across Northern Ireland's power-sharing executive have condemned the riots, saying this. As ministers representing every party and department in the Northern Ireland executive, we strongly condemn the racially motivated violence witnessed in recent days and make an urgent appeal for calm across society. The alleged serious sexual assault reported on 7th of June in Ballymena was appalling, and our collective thoughts are with the victim and their loved ones at this deeply traumatic time. It is paramount that the justice process is now allowed to take its course so that this heinous crime can be robustly investigated. Those weaponizing the situation in order to sow racial tensions do not care about seeing justice and have nothing to offer their communities but division and disorder. While all of our citizens have the right to engage in peaceful protest, there can never be any justification for the violence that has taken place in recent days, during which residents have been terrorized and numerous PSNI officers injured. At this point, we were going to have a journalist from Northern Ireland who'd been to the town today, but unfortunately she was unable to join us because she's currently stuck on a train. Stephen, though, you've researched this story. I suppose, what can you tell us about this? It does look quite reminiscent of what we saw in England last summer, but if anything, more extreme, actually.
Yeah, it is of a type with the protests or the riots rather that we saw in England last summer, as well as with the ones that we saw in Dublin the year before in 2023. I mean, I'm sure that there are going to be lots of local details here that a local journalist would be able to tell us about that I can't, that will additionally shed light on the situation. But I think it is fair enough to draw some broader connections. So, as I say, well, as we saw from the piece, the sort of trigger or the purported trigger, what people are saying was the trigger for these riots was the alleged sexual assault of a teenage girl by two teenage boys who appeared in court, and their charges were read out to them by a Romanian translator. Last year in England and in Northern Ireland, where there were also riots, it followed the murder of some very small children by Axel Rudakabana. And in 2023, it followed an Algerian migrant who had naturalized as an Irish citizen, targeting some school children and a teacher on the streets in Dublin. So in all these cases, you have like an act of violence committed by someone who is, foreign, a migrant, and that then triggers this huge wave of anger. But in all of those cases, it's also clear that the anger isn't just about the crime. I mean, plenty of people in Ballymena today have been sort of compiling lists of all of the different sexual assaults that have happened on young girls and young women in the area, none of which resulted in these kinds of riots or this kinds of violence on the street, because the perpetrators in all of those cases were white. So they went through their court cases and then they went to prison or whatever. There was no street violence. Same could be said of the murder of those girls last year by Rudakabana. We don't see this kind of outpouring of real anger in other cases, and partly that's because there is this huge movement, which is not just an English movement, not just a British movement, it's not just a UK movement, it's a kind of European and North American movement to whip up anti-migrant sentiment all the time. Plenty of politicians as well, sort of standing on the sidelines, some of them fanning it a little bit, many of them doing nothing or not addressing it at all. And what they're getting hold of and whipping up is genuine anger at migration. And I think it's something that the left is not really very good at addressing, because there's an argument that one often wants to make, which is that, migration's a net good for the country. I actually believe that's the case. We also need it because we have a problem of social reproduction where we don't have people who can do the jobs that we need to do as a society with an aging population because birth rates are falling. So we don't have people who can look after our elderly people or who can work in our NHS or can do all the other kinds of jobs that either there aren't enough of us who are, naturally born, or let's just say white British to do, or because there's not enough of us who want to do those jobs. So that's a net benefit. There's a solution to the social reproduction problem. There are also other benefits to migration. But the thing I think that we don't talk about nearly enough is that in a country like ours, where goods are incredibly unequally distributed, the benefits of migration are also incredibly unequally distributed. And in fact, the way that migration often occurs means that disbenefits may be distributed. So in this case, as well as in the case where riots happened in England last year, you saw a lot of places where it's a poorer area, people doing lower paying jobs. When migrants come to the country, they often take up lower paying jobs, and so therefore also move to areas with lower rents. Or in the case of the Tories' asylum policy, were moved to hotels in places where people were poorer. And those very fast demographic changes can be shocking to people. There is also in those areas a real lack of proper distribution of state resources. So, for example, there are often areas which are just not doing well, not funded, and suddenly you have an influx of more people demanding the same services in those areas which are already overstretched. And yeah, it's a tinderbox. It's not caused by migration, though. It's caused by the ways in which the state, politicians, deal with migration and also deal with the distributions of goods in our society in general. And none of those things are going to change. We don't have any politicians who are really looking very hard at changing those things. So what that means is that these kinds of events are just going to occur again and again, which is awful. It's awful for migrants, and it's also awful for people who get caught up in the violence, who aren't necessarily, I think, in many cases. I mean, there are definitely leaders, there are definitely agitators, there are definitely, even insurrectionists. But there are also a lot of ordinary people who get caught up in it because it's the one channel where there's an ability to express actually some anger, which I think is not misplaced. It is misplaced, targeted at migrants, but I don't think it's necessarily misplaced in general.
It's interesting to see how this develops. Hopefully, if this continues, we will manage to get a local journalist on, because I'd be very interested to know how this sort of does or doesn't map onto the usual violence that people have associated with Northern Ireland over the past few decades, which is sectarian. Stephen, let's wrap up there. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you guys for watching. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.